Okay, let's start looking at some of these jigsaw pieces in a bit more detail. And we'll begin with anxiety, that awful, churning feeling in the pit of your stomach, that feeling that makes your muscles tense and causes you to tremor while your heart rate increases, your breathing becomes rapid and shallow, and try as you might, you can't concentrate on anything. Well, believe it or not, anxiety is a good thing. You see, anxiety is the thing that gets you out of the way when that speeding car comes round the corner. It's what gets you out of bed in the morning, because if you didn't, you'd lose your job. Anxiety is a sort of call to action that keeps us safe when danger looms. It's the thing that stops you going down that dark alley late at night where the muggers live. Anxiety, properly used, is a good thing. You see, it's part of our survival response. It's part of our freeze, flight and fight protocol. Something that evolved way, way before we became humans, or even primates. Crocodiles have the freeze, flight and fight response because crocodiles have a part of the brain called the limbic system, which does 5 things and 5 things only. The limbic system does freeze, flight, fight, feed and reproduce. That's it. That's all it can do. We have a limbic system too, and for a very good reason. I want you to imagine it's not the modern world. Imagine it's 2.5 million years ago and we're on the savannah in Africa. And we're looking at a little creature called an Australopithecus afarensis. It's one of our early ancestors. It's about the size of a chimpanzee, and it lives in the tall grass on the savannas, on the plains of Africa. To us it would look a little bit like a hobbit. To a saber-toothed cat, it looks like lunch. Now, saber-toothed cats, like all predators, were attracted by movement. So when the Australopithecus becomes aware of a saber-toothed cat or any other sort of predator, the first thing it does is freeze. And you might have had that experience yourself, where you've been so frightened you couldn't move. That's not a voluntary thing, that's an automatic response, because if you don't move, the predator might not see you. And if it doesn't see you, well then, you're safe. But if it does see you, well, now bear in mind that an Australopithecus afarensis was about that big. A saber-toothed tiger was about 9 feet long from tail to nose, and the teeth at the front were about 6 inches long. It can run way, way faster than your average Australopithecus, but the Australopithecus still has to try, and that's what your anxiety symptoms are about. You need, if you're that Australopithecus, you need to be able to use your body to the best of its ability. So, your heart rate goes up to get blood and nutrients to the big muscles in your arms and your legs where they're needed to run fast or possibly to fight hard. Your breathing increases, it becomes rapid and shallow because that's the most effective way to get oxygen into the bloodstream when the heart's pumping that fast. Your muscles become tense because all that energy is stored up in them. That's why you shake. All of that generates heat, which is why you sweat. But more than that, you get that churning stomach feeling. Now what's that about? This is really, really knoppy. The churning stomach feeling is the experience that you get when the blood supply to your stomach is reduced sufficiently to allow you to keep your stomach alive, so the organ doesn't die, but it's no good for digesting food right now because all of that blood supply is diverted to the big muscles in your arms and your legs, because you're going to need that energy to run away. Good, isn't it? That's why you get the churning stomach. It's also why people with anxiety problems that last for any length of time end up with digestive problems. They might find it difficult to eat. When they do eat, they might get constipated. That's to do with the economy of the body. It's the way that different priorities for blood supply are put to the fore at different times. Now there's another organ in your body that's even more expensive than your stomach, and that's your brain. Now, I've talked about the limbic system part of the brain. There are two other parts of the brain I want to mention as well. And if we call the limbic system the reptile brain, because even crocodiles have got them, they do the five things: freeze, flight, fight, feed, reproduce. That's why they might meet at the watering hole, but that's not because they're friends. They don't have relationships like that. It's because that's where the gazelle will come to drink, and they might just be able to catch one. That's why crocodiles are there, not because they're friends, because their brains, their limbic system, which is all they've got, won't allow them that sort of relationship. Then we have the mammal brain. Now they can be friends, they can have relationships, and they can enjoy life in ways that we might begin to understand. That's why little bunny rabbits hop about and play in the sunset. It's why cats will snuggle. It's why horses group together, because they have that next bit of the brain as well, which we're calling the mammal brain. And then there is what we'll call the primate brain. That's the bit that can solve problems. That's why you can understand what I'm talking about. You understand my language and the abstract concepts that I'm discussing. That's why you can solve the crossword in the local paper or go down the pub and talk politics, because you've got that extra bit of the brain that solves problems. Now, ask yourself this. If you're in freeze, flight or fight, which bit of the brain do you need to use? Of course, it's the limbic system. And so, just as it does with the stomach, the body diverts nutrients and blood supply and oxygen away from the other two parts of the brain. That means the more anxious you are, the harder it is for you to solve problems, and the less interested you will be in relationships. That's why anxious people sometimes run away and leave their friends to face danger. That's why when you're anxious, you can't solve the problem you're anxious about, because you're forever flitting from one thought to another. And there's a reason for that too. If you're faced with a predator, there's a reasonable chance that it's not on its own. So, you have to keep looking around. That one's there. Oh, there's one over there. Look, there's another. Oh, but that one's moved. That one hasn't. That's okay for now. But this one's come a bit closer as well. I need to go over here. And you can't focus on one, because if you focus on the one in front, the two at the sides, well, they'll just kill you. So your anxiety prevents you from thinking in any reasonable sort of way. It's very quick awareness of this, of that, of the other, but not time to think anything through. And I'm sure anyone who's been anxious listening to this video or watching this video will understand that. Now, we are humans, we are emotionally driven, which means that the important things that we do because we feel an emotion that drives us to do it. And the emotion that gets us to run away is fear. Anxiety, fear, they're all part of the same stable. It's the fear that drives us both physically, with the changes we've just talked about, but also in our intention. So just like the Australopithecus, we run. But what if you can't run? Well, then you have to stand and fight. And you need a different emotion for that. For that you need anger. And that's why in mental health care we lump anxiety and anger together in more or less the same category. Because if you think about the physiology of anger, it's no different from the physiology of anxiety. So your body is already primed to fight as soon as your emotion clicks over from fear to anger. That's it, you go for it. It's a good protocol when used appropriately. The problem is it's not always used appropriately. There is appropriate and inappropriate anxiety. Appropriate anxiety, that's what we've just described. That keeps you away from the mugger down the dark alley. It gets you out of the way of the speeding car, and it gets you to work in the morning. That's all good. Inappropriate anxiety is when you are anxious about something that isn't a threat or not a serious threat. So, for example, you may have come across or heard about people who are so anxious they can't leave the house, or they're frightened to touch everyday objects like, I don't know, soap or cats. They're people whose anxiety is inappropriate. And there are various ways that we deal with it. The very simple one for anxieties that aren't actually phobic is get someone to ask themselves 3 questions. The first one is, what's the worst that can happen? And the reason why we get people to define the worst that can happen is because it makes them focus. You see, normal anxiety is hard to pin down. People are anxious about going out, but they don't know really why. They can't tell you what it is about going out that makes them anxious. They're just anxious about going out. Well, okay, what's the worst that can happen? Get them to focus on it, because then it becomes real, it becomes tangible, and it's something that you can work on. So the second question, if the worst did happen, how could we deal with it? And come up with a plan. The worst happens. Okay, well, this is how you can survive it. Depending upon what they say, you come up with a plan. If the fear is that they'll get beaten up by somebody next door, okay, well, that might happen. How can you prevent them from hitting you? And if you can't prevent them from hitting you, so that they just shout at you a bit instead, how can you deal with the fact that you've been assaulted? And as long as they aren't dead or severely crippled, which isn't that likely in most circumstances, then you can talk to them about, well, you can go to the police, or you can go to A&E and get yourself patched up and think, well, okay, that's the end of that. They've had their payback and it should be finished now, or whatever it might be. How do you deal with it? And then the third question, now that we know how you can deal with this, you won't like it, but it's not going to kill you, then the next question that you ask the anxious person is much more obvious. How do we stop this worst thing from happening in the first place? And hopefully, by this time, they'll be focused enough and a little calmer, and so they can answer that question too. And together, you can come up with a plan that will allow them not to feel comfortable about going out, but to understand that it's not the end of the world and they can actually go out. But then you have people who can't define their fear. Then you have people who are just phobic. So let's say we have someone with agoraphobia, that's the fear of going outside, literally the fear of the marketplace. Then we take a slightly different approach. It's called gradual desensitization. So a person's frightened of going out. Well, you visit them at home, and you talk to them about going out, which will create an anxiety response in itself. Now, that's okay. You keep talking to them about going outside until they're bored with it. Because if you're bored with something, you're not frightened of it. So they're now able to talk about going outside. And then you get them to put their coat on, as if they were going outside. And that might frighten them too. But you get them to stand there with their coat on until they're not frightened of it anymore. Then you get them to stand behind the front door and put their hand on the door handle until they're not frightened of it anymore. Then you get them to open the door and stand there until they're not frightened of it anymore. And that until they're not frightened of it part is really important. If you don't do that thoroughly enough, you'll fall right back to where you began. But once you've got them to a point where they can stand next to an open door and look out onto the street or whatever happens to be outside their house, then you get them to step outside. Just one step outside. Stand on their doorstep until they're bored of it. Then you get them to take another step until they're bored of it. Then you get them to close the door until they're bored of it. Then you get them to walk a little further. Perhaps if they have a garden path, they walk halfway down the path. And then, when they're bored of that, they walk to the garden gate. Only then do you include locking the door. So you go back to standing just outside the front door, but they have to lock it. And then you stand there until they're bored of it. Then you go back to halfway down the path, to the garden gate, to outside the garden gate. The door's locked, remember, they can't easily run back in. And you keep on doing that and going to a local shop or the bus stop or wherever it may be, 10 yards down the road, however far it is. You do this in stages. Remember, it's called gradual desensitization, until eventually that person gets to the point where they can go anywhere. Now, this takes time, but it's very effective. Do not rush it. That's called flooding when you rush it, and it causes post-traumatic stress disorder, which is not pleasant. But you can see that what we're doing here is we are providing evidence of safety, of security. So at every stage, when you come back into the house, you get them to consciously be aware that they're safe. Don't allow them to not notice that they're safe. Make it conscious. Talk to them about being safe. It's very repetitious. There's a lot of doing the same thing or nearly the same thing over and over again. But it works. And it works because of laying down good memories. And that's another real key to overcoming anxiety. Lay down positive memories. You see, you could have someone who, let's say it's about, I don't know, driving, which is one that happened to me a little while ago, driving a car. And let's say that they've driven, as I had, for many, many years, and then they had an accident that wasn't their fault. And therefore there's nothing they can change that will prevent another similar accident from happening again, because they did nothing wrong the first time. That one event can override all of those years of safely driving beforehand. And that's because of another evolved strategy we have in our heads. It's called the availability effect. Most recent memories are most available to us. So what you need to do is get recent memories that are safe and build up another store of available memory. And if you can do that with the person, then over time they will overcome their anxiety. It won't disappear immediately, but it will start to fade until eventually they don't even think of it. Good, isn't it? So, in overview, anxiety is about thoughts which lead to physical change and to emotional change which drives behaviour. So the best way to deal with it is to attack it first by the thoughts, but secondly by experience. Because if you can get that person to lay down positive experience, you can help them to beat anxiety. It may be you'll need to enlist the local doctor to help. There are some excellent medications that people can have which will help them to lessen the anxiety so they can actually do this work. But understand that it's important only to lessen it, not to remove it. You can't learn to deal with anxiety without feeling it. So I'm afraid there's no really gentle way to do this. You can support that person by being with them. You can make it very clear to them that as long as they're working with you on going outside or touching a cat or holding a tarantula, which would start with a discussion about a picture of tarantulas, by the way, and build up in the same way as they're going outside. You don't immediately take them to the tarantula farm. But whatever it is, you are with them every step of the way, and you debrief them after every episode.